Volume 3. The Murderess. 12 hours earlier. Chapter 1. Justine also was a girl of merit and possessed qualities which promised to render her life happy. Now all was to be obliterated in an ignominious grave, and I the cause. On the morning of Justine Moritz's birth, the doctor had taken one look at the infant's twisted spine and announced her life would be cursed. This was a tale Madame Moritz related when dissatisfied, which was often. Now, as Justine watched Elizabeth and Victor depart her cell, she considered how correct the doctor had been. She'd told them, "I do not fear to die, for that pang is past. God gives me courage to endure the worst." How could she have said such tripe? She'd lied to Elizabeth, lied to Victor, lied because she wanted it so badly to be true. The truth was she was terrified to die, so terrified that her bladder felt as though it would release at any moment, so terrified that she could hear her blood in her ears as it roared from her heart through her veins. Nor did she take any solace in her last confession, for this too was a lie. That absolution the priest offered was false. Now she was more miserable than ever. She'd never harm William. She'd loved him. No, more than that, she'd adored him. That slap was the only time she ever harmed him. She'd regretted it immediately and apologized profusely. "I'm your friend," she said. "Forgive me? I'll never do that again. I promise." But oh, that confession! It was false, along with the absolution she gained. This tormented her. Where would her soul reside for eternity? Alone in her barred and locked cell, Justine staggered toward the rancid pile of hay that served as her bed, dragging her manacles behind her. She curled against the hay and tucked her thumb inside her mouth. Her thumb smelled like stale bread. Her ribs ached from where they'd beaten her. Her eyes stung with tears. Scalp itched where they'd shaved her. Despite the bravado of her last speech to Elizabeth, Justine felt very alone and very scared. Absolution or no, God's grace felt very far away. She squeezed her eyes shut. Before her, she saw Elizabeth and Victor when they'd arrived in her cell, their concerned faces, no, their terrified faces, as they approached. Victor had appeared so different from when she'd last seen him, like a skeletal wraith. Elizabeth was thinner than ever, her sea-blue eyes enormous in her face. They'd been truly shocked at her condition. And then there was the stench of her cell, the water dripping. They'd probably never been inside a prison before. Neither had Justine until 2 months earlier. Now she was a murderess by name, if not by deed, hated by all, alone, unloved, friendless, save for Elizabeth. Outside her cell, Justine heard the rain begin, its soft percussion mingling with moans. The syndics, their cells were next to hers. They, at least, had the coin to guarantee soft beds and clean food. Elizabeth had only been able to send so much to Justine. The syndics would die before her on the morrow in a hail of bullets. Then they'd hang her, a mark of her crime. She could hear distant banging from Plain Palais, where they were building the scaffold. Her scaffold. Her heart raced. "Forgive me, Lord. I know not what to do. I confessed a lie." For all of her mother's faults, Madame Moritz had been devout, and this had affected Justine deeply. The prospect of death without divine solace terrified her. She must find another way to prepare for death. And then she knew. She'd make her own confession, even if this wasn't the way of her church. Justine crawled onto her knees. She clenched her hands. She began, lips dry against her fingers. "Dear God, this I confess with the hope of winning your favor and forgiveness. I was born 22 years ago in the village of Barrie to a gravedigger and his wife, both whom have passed on to your light and glory." As Justine whispered, all of her life rushed before her, brash and bitter. Her first breath to her father's death, her mother's hatred to the loss of her 3 siblings, and finally, the most significant day of her life, New Year's Day, 2 years earlier. That was the day she'd spied Elizabeth and Henry in the Cimetière des Rois near Caroline's tomb. "Lord, that day led to the greatest joy I'd ever known," she continued, "as well as my greatest regret." The lock to her cell clanked. She looked up. A guard, the kind one, the only one who pitied and believed her, though she never learned his name. He was bald, greying, squat. He held a tin plate from which an unappetizing stench drifted. "Praying?" he asked as he opened her cell door. She nodded, her throat tight. "I hang in the morning." How strange to say such a thing, like she was speaking of a carriage ride or a walk. "I heard, mademoiselle. You confessed." A long pause. Justine awaited a censure that never arrived. "If the rain remains heavy, perhaps you'll gain another day." Another day? For what? To fear? He offered the plate. The food on it appeared rancid, a slice of fatty meat, boiled potatoes. "Dinner, though I imagine you have no appetite." "Leave it on the stool, thank you." Once he left, she ignored the plate. She continued. "Back to that New Year's Day of 1792. When I saw Elizabeth in the cemetery," she said, her whispers inaudible over the rush of rain, the syndic's cries, the banging from Plainpalais. "I have so much to say that no one knows, Lord. I pray you forgive me." That New Year's Day had initially promised to be inauspicious. After avoiding Henry and Elizabeth in the cemetery, Justine had visited Caroline's grave, as she often did. She'd been a fool to go on New Year's Day when so many others would come. A deserted cemetery was a welcoming cemetery. Luckily, Elizabeth hadn't spied her. Once she was certain no one watched, Justine embraced Caroline's statue. She noticed several small drops of red on the snow beside the vase. Blood. If it hadn't been snowing, Justine would have contemplated this peculiarity, but the snow didn't encourage contemplation. In addition, her spine ached from the cold along with her feet. She was wearing a pair of boots Caroline had given her 4 years earlier, though with twice-mended soles. Therefore, instead of continuing through the cemetery toward Plainpalais, as she often did to prolong her time away from her mother, Justine departed the cemetery. This was a choice that would prove fateful. Up the steep hill she'd walked, all the way toward the Geneva city gate. Her chest grew tight from exertion, the icy air slicing her lungs. She needed to get before a fire before her chilblains worsened. Luckily, the guard at the gate didn't question her as he usually did. 1792, he greeted. He waved her through after belching without apology. New Year, mademoiselle. New Year indeed, monsieur. What was a new year to her? Only one day leading into yet another. Now that she'd reached the grand age of 19, Justine understood how days piled into weeks and weeks into years, each stacked upon another without remorse. Nothing would ever change in her life, or so she believed. Once past the Geneva gate, Justine continued toward the Arsenal and City Hall, which were decked in the flags of France, Switzerland, and the Republic of Geneva. Wet boots or no, her steps lingered near the Rue de Grange, where the Frankensteins resided. They didn't live far from the Catholic church her mother favored. Suddenly it all came back. She'd seen Henry Clerval accompanying Elizabeth Lavenza, who appeared more radiant than ever. Despite the space of 3 years, Justine had immediately recognized the Frankenstein's ward. How could Justine not take note of Elizabeth's exquisite golden hair and luminous blue eyes that always appeared too angelic for the world? The tremulous smile that accompanied her bell-like laughter. She hadn't responded to Elizabeth's greeting. She couldn't bear to, for she felt so reduced in station. Anyway, it wasn't Elizabeth Justine yearned to behold. While she was fond of Elizabeth and Victor, how could she not be? It was Caroline she adored. Justine's eyes clouded. If only Caroline still lived. She'd give anything to view that soft smile of welcome the Frankenstein matriarch offered everyone, whether they were well-to-do or a beggar, or a fatherless hunchback girl such as herself. But Elizabeth had survived. Beautiful Elizabeth, kind Elizabeth, perfect Elizabeth. Elizabeth, whom everyone loved. "It was your fault Caroline died," a voice inside her whispered. "You could have saved her." "Stop thinking of this," Justine muttered. "You're a fool." Better to accept what was lost. Hadn't the revolution of 1789 taught her as much? Neither God nor man could stop death from arriving any more than they could hold back the tide. Best to accept things as they were, not to yearn for better. This had been her rationale for ignoring the letters Elizabeth sent after Justine's departure from the Frankensteins. Madame Moritz initially seemed so eager for Justine's company, so filled with remorse, that Justine had reluctantly believed her. At last, her mother loved her. At last, her mother saw her as more than the sum of a deformed spine and rabbit-pale eyes. Justine was wrong. Soon after her return home, she discovered her mother believed God had punished her 3 siblings with cholera. "It's because I treated you poorly, Justine. I beg your forgiveness." As the sole surviving child, Justine had no choice but to work like a dog for her mother, especially after they left Bellerive for cheaper lodgings in Geneva. Soon, Madame Moritz's apologies turned to fists. "I am tested like Job. I wish God had taken you instead of the others." Yes, Justine could have returned to the Frankensteins, but to return felt a humiliation. Yet again, she'd failed to win her mother's love. Justine's memories ached, they teased. Had she really lived with a great family in a great house for 5 years? Been taught to read and educated in other ways? Gained friends of a sort? Worst of all, she hadn't learned all she could there, or become polished in a manner that would have afforded her entry into a finer world. Caroline's premature death had left Justine an unfinished creation, forgotten and uncared for. No matter. Now Justine had a real mother, not an imaginary one. A mother who still despised her. And then, on that snowy first day of 1792, Justine knew she'd never return to her mother. She couldn't. Better to find her way alone in the world. "I'll run away," she decided. But how did one run away from home? This wasn't something she'd considered. To gain time to think, Justine headed toward an inn on the Grand Rue. She had a few coins, enough to buy a coffee with change to spare. Justine sipped the steaming beverage slowly, ignoring drunken French soldiers laughing over a round of bouillotte, a card game popular from the Revolution. Once her stomach was fortified and mind cleared, she left the inn resolved. She'd find a coach, no matter its destination. Anything to leave her mother. By then, the afternoon was gone, the sky the colour of tarnished pewter. The coach stand on the Place du Bourg de Fort was deserted save for a woman wearing an oversized silk toque despite the inclement weather. She clutched a small spaniel in her arms, who yipped at Justine's approach. "The coach isn't coming." The woman's tones were clipped with impatience. "Are you certain, madame?" A dismissive tut. "I've been waiting since the snow started, mademoiselle." "Why not go someplace dry?" "Because I couldn't bear to go inside the inn. Those soldiers! Nor could I bear to go home. It felt so hopeless." This Justine understood too well. What shall I do? Then she realized it didn't matter where she went as long as she didn't return home, and quickly before her mother marked her absence. Heart pounding, Justine's boots slid in the snow as she rushed away. The gates were still open, the road from Geneva clear. Down she went, skidding on the hill, clutching the stone wall to keep from falling. She'd take shelter in Plainpalais, hide beneath trees until the storm stopped. Then she'd head toward the lake, where someone would row her to the other side in her quest for freedom. Yet instead of heading directly to Plainpalais, she found herself back inside the cemetery again, as though Caroline herself had beckoned. By then the bells were chiming 6 from St. Peter's. How eerie they sounded, like they'd grown weary of tolling for humanity's follies. As Justine approached Caroline's tomb, she saw a solitary man on the promenade holding a book. As he passed by, she saw he was tall and lanky. He wore a loose greatcoat that dropped past his thighs, dark brown hair on the longish side, delicate nose. He was reading as he walked, despite the snow and lack of light. After a furtive glance in his direction, Justine sank to her knees before the monument. She pressed her fingers along the slim letters carved into the tomb, recalling Caroline's kindness, Caroline's generosity. The blood she'd seen earlier was gone. It must have melted into the earth. She'd sit a moment, then decide what to do. "It cannot be! Is that you?" The reading man. He'd returned. His tenor voice was wonder-filled, ecstatic. Justine sidled from the monument, cold air catching in her lungs. He was striding toward her. From the vigor of his step, he was a young man, probably around Victor or Henry's age. Without understanding why, she broke into a run, her skirts tangling about her ankles. She slammed into the gravel. Before she could rise to her feet, a pair of legs clad in simple leather shoes and brown trousers arrived before her eyes. His book dangled from his hand. "You're not who I expected," he said in a flat voice. "For a moment I thought you were a ghost, though I knew it was ridiculous. Are you injured, citizen?" Citizen? Was he a revolutionary? "No." "The palms of your hands, they're bloody." "Just scraped. They're fine." Despite his lack of uniform, she was about to ask, "Are you a soldier?" She didn't. Better to ignore, to pretend otherwise. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure. I must hurry." Yet she couldn't seem to move. The gentleman knelt by her side. "Let me help you. The city gate is already locked for the night." "The gates don't lock until 10.
"Not today," he answered.
"Because it's New Year's?"
The young man chuckled softly. "You're clever."
Was his tone sarcastic? Justine couldn't tell. Then he smiled, causing her to suppress a gasp. She'd never seen someone so handsome. He resembled a poet, a hero from a book of French fairy tales. His dark eyes were warm, yet sensitive. When they met Justine's, she felt like she'd faint. His smile dropped. "Your spine. You're injured. We must find you a doctor, citizen. Some place to sleep. Come, I'll help you." Justine flushed. "I'm not injured. I bid you good night." She rolled onto her back, brushed off her shoulders. She'd find some place to take shelter for the night. Perhaps a hayloft, a barn. She'd decide where to go in the morning. She managed to rise. 1 step, 2. "Wait!" He reached for her wrist. "I beg your forgiveness, citizen." Justine turned back.
"For what?"
"I've caused you embarrassment." He pointed to her spine, his other hand still lingering on hers. "You were born that way, a hunchback. You bear no responsibility for your malformation any more than I do for mine." "Malformation?" Justine brushed off his hand.
"Again, I bid you good night, citizen."
She emphasized the final word, setting a sarcastic bent to the syllables. She strode away. "Come back!" He ran to keep up with her. "I insulted you, didn't I?" She glanced over her good shoulder, thrust out her chin.
"You only stated the truth. Yes, I am a hunchback."
Again, his hand on her wrist. "Stop, please!" His tone bore a familiarity that tore Justine in a place she couldn't name. It brought up memories of Sophie and her talk of love poppets, Caroline and Alphonse in tender moments, Elizabeth with Victor, Henry when he addressed Elizabeth. No one had ever spoken to her in such a manner, not even her father, the best and kindest man she'd ever known. Her eyes stung. "Leave me alone." "You're not the only one with bodily concerns. Look at me. I am also an invalid. Well, was one."
"You want my sympathy?"
"I do." He offered his book to her. Milton, Paradise Lost. Henry had taught it during their lessons.
You're a student, not a soldier.
He nodded. Let me offer it to you as a gift, citizen.
No, thank you.
Books were expensive. What would he want in exchange? Then I shall read for you instead. He recited, Should God create another Eve, and I another rib afford, yet loss of thee would never from my heart, no, I feel the link of nature draw me, flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe. As she listened, her heart sped like a rabbit she once held. What is your name? He asked once he finished reading. She lied, though she was uncertain why.
Julie. What's yours?
He smiled darkly. My name is Nobody, if I'm to believe my family. She laughed. She recalled Henry reading the Odyssey to her. It was a sign.
Like in Homer?
Ah, you're well read. I'll try again. My name is Adam, like the first man.
More likely Lucifer from your book. Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven and all that.
How bold she felt. Clever, like when she was trying to earn Caroline's approval. He met her eyes. If I'm Lucifer, you're an angel.
I'm not as simple as you believe.
She laughed again until he set his hand on her cheek. Instead of slapping him away, she pressed against him like a cat. She couldn't resist. How soft his gloves were. They must have been sewn of the finest kid. No more jokes, he said, cupping her chin. My name is Jean.
Jean,
she repeated, unable to pull from his gaze. Her father's name had been Jean. Surely this was another sign. We should find a place to sleep, Julie. The gates won't open for hours. Come with me. I'll protect you.
I shouldn't.
Jean set a hand over his heart. I promise not to harm your body or your soul, if you believe in such claptrap. A rakish grin. I also promise if you remain here, you'll freeze by morning.
I was going to take a boat.
No one is sailing tonight, not in this cold. Come. She couldn't argue with Jean's logic, nor did she want to. He reminded her of someone she knew. His straight nose, the way his chestnut hair dipped over his brow. She couldn't remember, though. So she followed him, and he kept his promise. He paid for a room at an inn. Nor did he touch her. Still, when she woke beside him in the morning, hair tangled and breath foul, her fears returned.
You won't harm me?
She asked as they pressed forehead to forehead. Never. He ran a finger along the twist of her spine. Perhaps this is where God meant to give you wings, he said, his voice husky. She pulled away.
I should go. My mother will be worried.
She wouldn't run away. Not after meeting Jean. Not yet. Stay another moment, Julie, please. There's something about the way you speak, the way you dress your hair, that reminds me of someone I lost. Your mother will understand once you explain the gates closed early because it was New Year's.
She'll wonder where I spent the night.
Tell her you took shelter in a hayloft. Another stroke of his finger, this time along the rise of her humped shoulder. You don't have to tell her about me. It'll be our secret. She drew a shaky breath, overwhelmed by desire and something else. Hope. She hadn't felt hope since Caroline's death. As they'd parted, Jean said, I'll be at the cemetery again at 4 if you can meet. I'll have time after class. And he was there. Somehow Justine found a way to escape her mother, to find freedom without running away. It helped that Justine had purchased a fresh bottle of laudanum. Her mother was too drugged to slap her anew. Liberty. It was within her heart, her mind. Revolution. Now she understood. This was what the soldiers meant when they sought it for their country. But first you had to begin with the individual, the citizen, or a man named Jean. From there on, Justine met Jean every afternoon by Caroline's memorial. They'd walk together, his hand resting lightly on her elbow.
Who knew an arm could hold so much sensitivity? He spoke of books he was reading, of events taking place in the world, of the impact he yearned to make once he finished university. She was elusive when she described her life, careful to avoid mention of her mother's hatred and her siblings' deaths. Nor did she speak of the terrible loss she'd suffered when Caroline died, or of the Frankensteins. Each day, their hands crept closer, and so by the time they finally pressed their lips together for the first time, it was spring, and the air smelled balmy with hope. When Jean had lain with her in a flower-dappled field one evening, he'd been so gentle she'd wept. He didn't take her innocence, though she offered it. Instead, they spent the entire night kissing and caressing. As they lay together, he vowed, "Flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe." Only good could come from this, she decided. For once her body could bring her joy, not shame. Even if they never wed, he'd mould her as Caroline had intended. He'd leave her a finer Justine, a wiser Justine. He'd give her books and kisses and caresses. She'd offer him a gift she'd shared with no one in her life save her father and Caroline. Love. Alas, it was this love that would curse Justine to a dank jail cell outside Plain Palais. Her fate was set by the time Alphonse Frankenstein brought her to live anew in his home after Madame Moritz's death. "You," she said, when she'd seen Jean emerge in the Frankenstein's hall the morning after her return. "It can't be." But it was. "What are you doing here?" her suitor demanded, his face covered in soap. He'd been yelling for hot water. "I'm in service to the family," she mumbled. How different Jean appeared. A stranger. An aristocrat. "The Frankensteins." "You work for my father?" His neck reddened and chest collapsed. Suddenly she realized why Jean appeared so familiar. He resembled Caroline, that's who. "You mustn't say anything," he whispered, panicked. "Not to my father or brothers, nor to the rest of my family when they return from Lake Como, Julie." "Justine," she corrected, shamefaced. "My name is Justine. I'm here to help the Mademoiselle with William when they return." "My brother, William." He bit the soft of his lip. "I suppose I should confess the truth, too. My name is Ernest." Ernest, the middle brother? The one who lived in the Alps because of his lungs? Justine had never met him. She recalled Caroline fretting over Ernest before her death, upset Alphonse refused to send for him. By then, Caroline was raving with fever, unable to understand they were protecting Ernest from a similar fate. "It won't do for you to address me by my Christian name here," Ernest continued. "My father is impatient with me these days." A rueful smile. "I haven't exactly won his favor." Justine's cheeks burned. "It seems we've both had secrets." She recalled how he'd felt lying beside her in the field outside Geneva, like they were the only two people in the world. Now, the world rushed in. "I must go, citizen." He gave her a quick peck on her forehead after looking up and down the hall. "Likewise, citizen." "Oh, and when you have a moment, tell Sophie to bring me hot water." Then he'd left her alone in the hallway, bearing a pile of linens and a huge secret. Days later, when Elizabeth returned from Lake Como, she said, "I heard you met Ernest while I was away. I do hope he wasn't unpleasant. He's still not accustomed to us after being gone for so long. Fortunately, his health has quite recovered. It's best you avoid him unless you relish discussing politics for hours." But Justine wouldn't be deterred. Instead, something hot and strong rose inside her. Something sly. Something she'd never experienced despite all of her mother's accusations. "I'll force him to marry me. God will forgive me." With this, Justine sensed a shadow fall across her. A shadow that would bring only death. Chapter 2.
She then related that, by the permission of Elizabeth, she had passed the evening of the night on which the murder had been committed at the house of an aunt at Chêne, a village situated at about a league from Geneva. When Justine reached this part of her confession, heat rose along her breasts, her cheeks. Shame. How could God forgive her if she couldn't forgive herself? Was this even possible? She gazed up toward the slant of a window as though it might hold the answer she required. The sky was lightening. The rain had stopped. The hammering had ceased. Not much longer. She glanced down at the rough black tunic she wore, which they gave her after she'd been condemned, her hands still folded in prayer. I must trust in God's mercy. There's no time for anything else. Heavenly Father, she continued, speaking more quickly, what next happened is the most painful to confess, for it is here I turned my sinful desires into deed. Once she learned her beloved was Ernest Frankenstein, Justine spent the remainder of the day plotting how to marry him. After all, Elizabeth was to wed Victor. Like Elizabeth, Justine was an orphan favored by the Frankensteins. But unlike Elizabeth, she did not have noble blood, nor had she been raised by Caroline as her ward. After much turmoil, Justine decided on a path she knew to be immoral. That night, she found her way into Ernest's bed while the entire house slept. I love you, she murmured. While Ernest didn't respond in kind with his words, he did respond with his body. He hadn't the will to turn her away. For the first time in her life, Justine was happy, for she was loved. Even if Ernest never declared as much, didn't his lips confess this? His hands, his fingers, they swam through her long silvery hair, pulling her face toward his, her hips against his thighs, until she lost herself in a pleasure she'd never known existed. You're like moonlight, he murmured against her flesh. An enchantress. His love was an untainted love, unlike the love of her father, which had been hindered by her mother's disapproval, or the love of Caroline, which Justine had never fully gained. Only good can come from this, she told herself. He loves me. He must. Yet some things could not be escaped. Some nights after they'd lain together, panting and sweaty and whispering each other's names in the dark, she'd return to her room and hear William squirming in the bed beside hers. She'd recall Caroline's screams when she labored to bring him into this world, the blood seeping from her nether regions, the afterbirth. All that to create life. God should have thought of a better way, a kinder way, for it was unfair the female should suffer so. She'd overheard Victor say as much. And so Justine and Ernest's affair continued. Months passed, comprised of nights that felt endless, days that left Justine giddy with hope. By the time spring arrived, Ernest admitted he loved her too. He gave her gifts of ribbons and marzipan, a lace fichu. Justine hummed as she went about her chores, sleep-deprived but blissful. Elizabeth noticed Justine had grown shadows beneath her eyes and said as much. I hope William isn't keeping you awake all night. Justine only smiled in answer, for she was holding a secret too precious to share. Then one day the secret took shape in a manner she hadn't expected. Hadn't Ernest been careful not to spend inside her during their intimacies? I think I'm with child, she announced when she next came to his bed. By then it was May 1794, and Victor was still ill in Ingolstadt with brain fever. Ernest blanched in the dark. How far? She counted on her fingers. 4 months? Indeed, her stomach was slightly rounded where it had been concave. She could no longer deny this. She again thought of Caroline as she labored, her screams, the blood. It will be different for me. It must. Merde! This cannot be. We were careful. He turned and ignored her until she'd had no choice but to creep back to her bed, where William slumbered, sweet-breathed and innocent. She kissed the boy's forehead, wondering what it would be like to have a child of her own, trying not to think of her mother, the slaps, the bruises, the insults.
Ernest will marry me, she told herself. He just needs time to get over the shock. This was what was meant to happen, even if it wasn't the same as Elizabeth's engagement to Victor. This was what Ernest needed to be taken seriously by his father. Surely Caroline would approve. The following morning, Ernest was nowhere to be found in the mansion. Justine located him in a tavern on the Grand Rue. She had his voice ring out when she was strolling with William across the square. When she returned to the tavern later, he was still there, smelling strongly of ale and sweat. He and several soldiers were arguing over politics. Justine sidled up to him, praying no one would consider her a prostitute. Ernest reluctantly acknowledged her after she hung on his sleeve long enough. While she waited, she felt the first stirrings of life inside her womb. They fluttered like butterfly wings. It lives, she breathed to herself in wonder. She couldn't yet think of the baby as a boy or girl.
"I'd thought we'd speak later," he grunted. "Can't you see I'm busy?"
She shyly took his hand. "I missed you. Did you miss me?" He grimaced as he took another gulp of ale.
"How do you know it's mine?"
Justine blinked away tears. "Of course the baby's yours. I was a maiden until we lay together."
"What of afterward? You could have been with others."
Justine's hand ached with the urge to slap the words from his lips. The next day, when William was too demanding during lunch, she slapped him instead. "I'm sorry, so sorry," she wept after her hand lashed out and the child wailed. "Please don't tell anyone. Here, have a sweet. I'll never do that again, truly." But the damage was done. Worse, Elizabeth had witnessed her loss of temper. "Is all well? You look tired, Justine." "Forgive me," she said, bending down to comfort William. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me today." But she did know. She'd never be able to tell the truth to Elizabeth, who was so pure of heart. "I'm sorry," Justine vowed to both William and Elizabeth, wiping her eyes. Then she saw Ernest in the hall and rushed off, claiming she needed to bring him clean linens.
"What do you want from me?" he demanded once they were alone in his room. "Money? Trinkets? Is that what this is about? I can't marry you if that's what you're thinking. I'm only 17. My father will never allow it."
17? He was 5 years younger than she was. She'd thought him nearly Victor's age. "I thought you loved me," she said once she recovered.
"Perhaps I do. Well, if one believes in the love that joins bodies as well as spirits. But I don't believe in the bourgeois institution of marriage," he said, refusing to meet her eyes. "Love is a universal force. It shouldn't be set into shackles with institutions such as matrimony. It should be allowed to grow and shift as required."
He pulled a book from his desk, pointing to a dog-eared page.
"Rousseau writes, 'Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains.' I won't live in chains, Justine."
She slumped onto his bed. "What am I to do?"
"I don't know."
He flipped idly through his book.
"We could leave it at an orphanage when the time comes. No one need ever know if we're careful."
"I'm not abandoning our baby."
"Well, it's your baby, really. You can't prove it's mine. Though I suppose I can give you money. Tell me how much is required. I'll find a way. I also have some gambling debts I need to retire. I'll use those as an excuse."
"I don't want money."
"What do you want then?"
"Love," she sobbed. "A husband, a child."
"Well, I can't help you with those."
His temper rose in a way that shocked her. She understood why Alphonse found him so difficult. Ernest threw his book at the wall, then grimaced as though her physical form repulsed him.
"If you don't mind, I'd like to get dressed. Leave."
As Justine stumbled through the remainder of her days, she thought, who is this monster I loved? She'd believed Ernest a man, not barely out of childhood. Someone must be able to help, but who? She ran down the possibilities. Cook, Sophie, Elizabeth? No, definitely no. As soon as she'd finished her dinner, which tasted like sawdust, she remembered. That midwife in Shen, whom Sophie had mentioned during Caroline's pregnancy. "You can't miss her cottage," she'd said. "It's set beside a footbridge and has a bright green door." Before she could change her mind, Justine asked Elizabeth if she could have the evening off. "I received a letter, mademoiselle. My aunt in Shen. She's poorly." Before Justine departed, she offered William a kiss. "I'll tuck you in bed later, Dormouse," she said, truly remorseful. He turned his face away. "I don't like you any more, Justine." By the time Justine approached the midwife's cottage in Shen, the afternoon sky had shifted into that absurdly bright cobalt preceding twilight. Her heart pounded until she thought it would fly from her chest. Beneath it, she imagined the baby squirming in her womb. The midwife's cottage was exactly as Sophie had described years earlier, yet somehow more. But wasn't life always like that? Someone could tell you what to expect, but nothing could prepare you for the experience. The green-doored cottage appeared to be from a fairy tale, like the ones Caroline read. The bloom of a dark red rose pressed against the window glass as though lured by the warmth within. To the side of the door, 2 tall wooden planters spilling fragrant herbs. The center of the door was marked by a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. It glinted with the last gold rays of the day. Justine crossed the bridge and sank beneath the arbor, too distressed to pull the knocker. "Do I know you?" the midwife greeted after she overheard Justine sobbing on her doorstep. She wasn't what Justine expected. The midwife's face appeared ageless, with dark hair immaculately curled down to her waist like an old engraving from one of Victor's books. Her attire was no less remarkable. She was adorned in an ecru muslin gown suitable for summer. The bodice was gathered with a pale gold ribbon beneath her high, firm breasts. When she moved, the subtle scent of lavender wafted from the folds of her gown. "No, you don't know me," Justine replied once she'd found her tongue. "But I've been told of you." Once the green door shut behind them, Justine stood awkwardly in the center of a neatly attired sitting room, uncertain whether she'd happened into paradise or the devil's den. A tall mirror framed in gold hung on one side of the fireplace. It was dwarfed by a glass cabinet filled with bottles and jars, each labeled in a neat hand. Pennyroyal, Mercury, Cohosh, Belladonna. A thick-furred grey cat wound about Justine's ankles, persistent in its affections. "Ignore the cat. He's a nuisance, but I can't turn him out. As for you," the midwife granted Justine an appraising look, "you're in trouble." Justine broke down. "Forgive me, madame. I didn't know where to go." "I've heard this before." "I've been told you sell love poppets." The midwife gave a little smile. "Let me guess. Your gentleman no longer loves you, and you want to win him back now that he's left you with a bellyful of child." Justine nodded, her nose dripping like William's when he was in a temper. The midwife laughed softly, which only set Justine to sobbing harder. "You're not the first to come to me with such concerns." "I suppose I've been a fool." The midwife caressed Justine's cheek, again that scent of lavender. "Not a fool, a sweet, innocent child. And on top of that, a hunchback." Her tone gentled. "Life has not been easy for you, has it?" "I don't want to have a baby." And this was the truth. She recalled slapping William earlier that day, her mother slapping her, Caroline shrieking in labor. "But if I am to be a mother, I want my baby's father to love me, not to abandon me, to cherish me again, as he once did. Ah, how sorrowful I am." "Shush, child, listen to me. Those poppets don't bring love. They only offer confidence to those who yearn for it. But I can offer you something better. Freedom." A knowing pause. "You'll need to keep it a secret." Justine immediately understood what the midwife meant. "I shouldn't." Then she recalled a girl she knew who'd had a child out of wedlock. She'd ended up living on the street, where her baby was found frozen beside her one winter morning. Later, the girl expired from the French pox. After a long moment, Justine asked, Will it hurt? No more than your monthly issue. Though it depends. She raised Justine's apron to pat her belly. How far along are you? If it's too late, I can't help you. 3 months? 4? Now Justine couldn't be sure, or didn't want to be. The midwife nodded approvingly. That's good. Easier. Will it cost much? How much do you have on you? Do it. It's for the best. Before she could change her mind, Justine offered what money she'd brought. The midwife warned, You must never speak of this to anyone. If you do, I'll curse you and make your life a misery. Understood? Oh, Justine understood. Too well. By the time Justine departed, she was in possession of 2 small bottles whose ingredients the midwife refused to divulge. What if you're a French spy? Along with instructions to drink the first bottle when she reached home, and the second if she hadn't begun to bleed by morning. Justine couldn't wait. She drank the first one as soon as she crossed the bridge from Shen. A mile later, she felt nothing, so she drank the second. This one tasted fouler than the first. She clenched her jaw to avoid retching. By then it was night, and she approached the final bridge before Geneva, where a host of soldiers awaited. She slowed her step, trying to make herself appear as small as possible. Don't stop me, she prayed. I must get home. Her womb had begun to clench in a manner that felt more like a vice than the result of menstruation. Citizen, halt! Where are you bound? The tallest of the soldiers demanded. Geneva, she explained, gritting her teeth. I live there. Have you papers? I hadn't known I needed such. New law. I'll know better next time. Forgive me, I must pass. My mistress awaits. The first trickle of blood oozed between her legs. Or was it urine? She hadn't released water since she'd approached Elizabeth with her half-cocked excuse to walk to Shen. I must assist my mistress to bed. I'm her maid. Perhaps she should be helping you to bed. You're her equal, citizen. Justine offered her most flirty smile. I may be her equal in the sight of God, but I am not her equal in worldly coin, so labour I must. The soldier didn't laugh as she expected. Something else had happened, something bad. Again her womb clenched. May I pass? She asked again. The truth is I'm feeling poorly. My mistress has been ill. Perhaps I've caught it. I've orders. A child has gone missing, a boy. We've been instructed to question everyone who passes in and out of Geneva. Surely you don't think I have anything to do with this? Yet Justine felt compelled to help them search, unaware who the boy could be. By the time she slipped away from the soldiers, she didn't head toward the city gates. Anyway, they were probably locked by then. Instead, she found a hayloft in a farm belonging to no one she knew. She struggled to climb into it before she collapsed. By then, Justine could barely walk, but somehow she tied her apron around her nether regions to keep blood from staining her petticoats. And the pain, the pain! This was no monthly course like the midwife claimed. Her womb constricted and expanded, her back twisted as though it would break. As she laboured in the hayloft, she heard cows low below her, the horses neigh as she grunted, her teeth and lips clenched. It's alive, she thought, and it will kill me. It hates me, for I have abandoned it. But whatever was inside her womb didn't kill her. Instead, she felt a slither of something, no, someone, snake into her hands. She glanced down. A clot of thickened blood, a circle of tissue. Whatever it was, it had been something. Now, it was nothing. She wrapped the remains in her apron after saying a prayer for its soul. She fell into a fevered sleep. As she slept, she dreamt of William, of slapping him that one time. I'm sorry, she begged. Forgive me. Next, her mother appeared and hit her. I wish you had died instead of my other children. Then Ernest was before her, his expression loving like when they'd first met. His features transformed into something akin to the golem from her father's tale. The golem bore a scarred face, black flowing hair and eyes yellowed with jaundice. He resembled a demon, a monster. He hissed, "Awake, fairest. Thy lover is near. He who would give his life but to obtain one look of affection from thine eyes. My beloved, awake." Justine awoke with a start, chest thudding. She drew a deep breath and looked around the hayloft. No one was there. Larks were singing. The wind was soft. Dawn had arrived. "I'm free." She brushed the hay from her skirts. She buried her apron with the remains from her womb. Whatever discomfort she experienced now was nothing compared to what had been. As for the baby, her mourning would lessen in time. It was for the best. Her life would improve. God would understand. She'd be a better Justine, a finer Justine, as Caroline had intended. Justine's spirit was already lighter as she headed back to the Frankensteins, though she barely recalled how she walked there. She was so sore and exhausted. She found Ernest pacing in the hall beneath the tall oil portrait of Caroline. His eyes were red, his face blotched. "I'm not pregnant," she whispered. A smile crept across her lips. "I was mistaken. All is well." Ernest grimaced. "I suppose you think we can go on as we did?" She didn't say yes or no. She hadn't thought that far ahead. The only thing she thought of was her bed, for she felt so weak. She answered, "I don't know. I hardly slept last night because I was caught by the city gates. I had to take shelter in a hayloft." Ernest grabbed her by her shoulders and shook her. "You think that's why I'm here? That I was waiting for you? William is dead, you whore! That's why I'm here, still awake. There were search parties all night after he went missing in Plainpalais." The boy she'd been searching for, of whom the soldiers had spoken. Now Justine understood. Ernest continued in a rush. "We found his body in a field. Some evil fiend strangled him for reasons I cannot conjecture. Wherever you were last night, you weren't here. If you had been, he might not have been murdered." He shoved her away. "You should have been here to watch him, to protect him." William dead? It could not be. She glanced up at the oil portrait of Caroline, whose painted gaze accused. "I'm so sorry." Another wave of pain. She clutched her stomach. Another clot of blood slid between her legs. She convulsed, unable to stand. 2 days later, the locket bearing the watercolor of Caroline fell from her pocket in front of Alphonse and others. Ernest assumed the worst, though of course he never revealed the truth of their liaison to his family. "No matter the outcome of this trial, I know what happened. You murdered my brother to revenge yourself on me," he accused before her arrest. "You're a murderess." And then Justine understood the truth. If she hadn't visited the midwife in Shen, William wouldn't have died. If she hadn't loved Ernest, William wouldn't have died. If she hadn't tried to marry Ernest, William wouldn't have died. She would have been there to protect him that evening in Plainpalais. His death was her fault as surely as if she'd set her hands about his tender neck. "Ah, my poor dormouse," she thought, weeping. "What have I done?" Justine's whispered confession was interrupted by the turn of a key, the creak of a door. She looked up from her clenched hands. A guard, not the kind one who'd brought her dinner. This one was younger, dressed in the formal uniform of the Genevan Guard. He'd beaten her to ensure her confession. The priest hadn't stopped him. "Another moment," she implored, body shaking. "Please, I'm still praying. Not done yet. It's not dawn yet." Afraid, so afraid. Afraid. "Sun's rising. You already had last rites." He grabbed her wrists to unlock her manacles. "You can pray along the way." "One more moment. I beg you." He yanked her to her feet, yanked her linen cap from her scalp, revealing her shorn head. Before he roped her arms to her side, she quickly crossed herself. "Forgive me, Lord. Unto you do I offer my soul." Chapter 3. And on the morrow, Justine died. She perished on the scaffold as a murderess. Outside the jail, the summer sky was bright with dawn, the street puddled with rain from yesterday's storm. Justine blinked, eyes struggling to take in the infusion of light, before the guards forced her into the cart that would transport her to Plainpalais. Once they reached the edge of the field, the cart shuddered to a halt.
"We wait here," the guard told her.
They'd execute the syndics first. Her hanging would follow, like an afterthought. From her perch in the cart, Justine watched the 11 syndics stand in a straggling line beside the scaffold, far from the oak trees edging the park. Their mortal coils were dispatched with 3 short bursts of bullets. Justine flinched at the rifle's booms. Though the syndics submitted to their fate with silent stoicism, their families wailed and screamed. Justine turned away, eyes flooding.
"No one will mourn me save Elizabeth."
Their cries of sorrow were drowned out by applause and shouts by those circling the Liberty Tree, a young elm.
"To liberty!" someone cried. "Onward!"
The deed complete, Justine hoped the crowd would drain from Plainpalais like water from a sink. Not so. The crowd thickened to include hundreds, for all wanted to see the spectacle of a child murderess put to death.
"They're here for you,"
another guard jeered, dragging her from the cart.
"Aren't you proud? Now march!"
The crowd pushed toward her, hands reaching, mouths shouting, ugly with hatred, ruddy-faced with fury.
"Murderess!"
one woman yelled, her scarred features below her red cap distorted. Others joined her cry, "Murderess! Hang her!" And then someone slapped her, hard. A woman, grey-haired and skinny. A woman like her mother, but not. Justine's cheek stung, her nose. Something thick and warm dripped from it. Her legs froze. She felt like a rabbit cornered by a fox, a mouse trapped by a cat, a fish caught in ice.
"I can't walk,"
she sobbed, wiping her nose against her wrist. Blood against flesh. The guard shoved her against the pebbled ground.
"Go! Or do we need to drag you?"
One step, another, 2 more.
"I'll imagine myself out of my body. I must."
There she was, a small hunchbacked woman dressed in a plain black kirtle, nose seeping red, shoulders shaking, her back twisted, her gait jerky like a puppet, her scalp covered in scabs where the knife had scraped too close when they'd shaved her head, eyes wide, tear-filled. Her elbows were bound tight beside her body, allowing her to grasp her hands in prayer. The drums began to trill, overtaking the shouts. Another step toward the scaffold.
"God grant me mercy."
5 more steps, the scaffold above. The wood smelled wet, reminding her of spring.
"God grant me grace."
The gnarled wood stairs, still slippery with rain.
"God grant me courage."
She reached the edge of the platform, where a soldier tugged her by the soft of her arm until she stood beside the noose. She looked about. No hangman. Not yet. She swayed, knees uneasy, eyes scanning the crowd below. Who knew Plainpalais could hold so many? Where was the hangman? When was he coming? Of the hundreds awaiting her death, she found herself searching for that midwife. Yes, Justine had remained silent, but what good had it done? At the very edge of the crowd, she spied an unnaturally tall, dark-haired man. He was half hidden behind oak trees. Was he laughing? He was. Such cruelty.
"Lord, please don't let this be the last thing I see before my death. Let me see something else. Something to remind me of your kingdom I pray awaits me."
She raised her eyes toward the dawn sky, which remained clotted with pink clouds. The trees, verdant with summer, leaves swaying in the breeze. The mountains, majestic in their height. Mont Blanc with its celestial crest of snow. All so beautiful.
"Mademoiselle?"
Justine gasped. The hangman. He'd been behind her the entire time, his face hidden by his black mask. How blue his eyes appeared. So brilliant. In one swift motion, he thrust a hood over her head like he was bagging a fox. The world disappeared. How loud her breath sounded inside the hood, like sun burning through burlap. God grant me courage. She felt the noose loop around her neck. The rope was wet, probably from rain. She shivered despite the July torpor. God grant me forgiveness. Don't struggle, the hangman urged, his words muffled by his mask. That'll make it worse. I've done this many times. The drop will break your neck instantly if you let your body give way. You shan't feel a thing. I can't see a thing now. She tasted mucus amid the blood from her nose. Breathing, breathing, shaking, shaking. God save my soul. God protect me. The hangman tugged at the noose, placing the knot against the base of her skull. Once the noose was settled, a rush of noise roared from the crowd. Applause. Shouts. Murderous, murderous, murderous. The drums began anew, a roll of tension and hysteria. Murderous, murderous, murderous. The drums grew faster, louder. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, she whispered inside the hood, I pray you take my soul. She squeezed her eyes shut so tight they burned. She bit the soft of her lip until she tasted iron. The resurrection and the glory. Amen. Another drum roll began, one that lengthened and spread until Justine could feel the beats of her heart between each bang. She sensed the hangman moving away from her, footsteps behind her. It's going to happen now. He's going to hang me. To her surprise, Justine realized she hadn't truly believed the hanging would occur, though this made little sense. There she was with a noose around her neck, a hood over her head, a hangman hovering behind her. Her entire body shook as though with fever. Any comfort she'd won from her last confession fled. All of her life had been cursed, save for Elizabeth's friendship. First her mother, who had despised her, then there'd been her desire for Ernest. But Caroline, oh Caroline, Justine had adored her. If only she'd been able to save her from scarlet fever. And poor William. She couldn't bear to think of... The trap door opened. The rope went taut. The crowd roared. Chapter 4. It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of my being. All the events of that period appear confused and indistinct. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me. It was with considerable difficulty that Justine was to remember what happened next. First, a slice of light pressed on her nerves so bright that she was obliged to shut her eyes. Or perhaps they were already shut. A multiplicity of sensations overtook her. She heard and smelt at the same time the tinge of blood, the damp of mold, the rattle of cobblestones. She could distinguish nothing but agony about her neck, her body. She felt herself to be a poor, miserable wretch. She tried to weep, but found she couldn't. Miraculously, her mind remained active. Or was it her soul? Somehow she recalled what happened after the rope dropped. All hadn't turned to black like the hangman promised. Instead, she dangled, twisting, her neck growing longer and tighter as she strained for air. Her bladder released, her fingers extended, toes too, flailing for a hold that wasn't there. Her eyes wide, seeking light. The crowd quieting before darkness arrived. And then, nothing more. Until now. Justine felt her body lifted into a long box, one whose rough surface tugged at her skirts. A coffin. A tenor male voice, Henry Clerval's. I'll take her from here. Splintered wood against her flesh. A lid slid into place. She tensed, awaiting the tattoo of hammering. It never arrived. Some time later, cobblestones rattled beneath her bones. Darkness returned, the same opaque lack of light she recalled before the hangman had pulled the lever and the drums had rolled. It was to grow darker still. She remembered nothing more for some time. Then a soft glimmer of light glowing and shifting above her head. The moon? Justine's eyes focused on a shadowy blur of gold hair and eyes like an azure sky. Not the moon, a woman's face. A face she'd grown to know well over the past 9 years. Though the flesh around the woman's eyes were red from tears and her mouth grim, there was an innate innocence, no, a simplicity about her expression, as well as an otherworldly beauty. The woman's face appeared weighted by worry, sorrow. A pale hand extended, fingers clutching a single rose the color of blood. The velvety petals bore a heavy perfume, fecund, decaying. Lightning cracked, illuminating the woman's face in full. Now Justine possessed no doubt as to whose face she beheld. "Great God!" Elizabeth breathed, the rose dropping from her hand. "You're still alive!" Then all turned black. Is Justine alive? Or did I imagine her breathing? These questions rang in Elizabeth's mind inside the carriage bearing Justine's coffin as it sped toward Lake Como. Once Elizabeth noticed Justine's chest rising and falling, she'd immediately insisted the coachman leave, not daring to wait for Henry. It was only later enough that they'd passed the Geneva city gates, later enough that Elizabeth understood no one followed as they skirted the Italian border, that she asked herself why she'd abandoned Henry to accompany Justine's coffin without him. The answer came readily. Henry was too good, too honest. If Justine was alive, as Elizabeth believed, best he not know. She couldn't ask him to deceive others on her behalf. Too much of a risk. She loved him too well to expect him to lie. And then she thought of Victor, of Alphonse, both of whom she'd abandoned with only a note explaining her decision to bury Justine at the Villa Lavenza. They'd be upset, but not nearly as upset as she knew Henry would be. She'd write him once she arrived. She prayed he'd forgive her. They'd wed another time. What was more distressing were her worries about Justine. Could she breathe inside the pine box? Was she putting the girl's life at stake? Justine's dead. You only want her to live to make up for Caroline's death. You've left the man you love to run away with a corpse. As the leagues passed with the hours of the night, Elizabeth's thoughts tossed to and fro like the swaying of the carriage on the rain-pitted road. The carriage rose into the Alps, leaving the lake behind. The air grew clearer, cooler. Elizabeth's eyes strained out the window into the darkness. By then the clouds had cleared, allowing a profusion of stars to glimmer in the inky sky, the sweep of the Milky Way, a crescent moon. The serene beauty didn't silence Elizabeth's mind. How had Justine lived? It must have been the noose. Elizabeth once read of a Scottish woman who survived hanging due to a wet rope. Hours later, she'd regained consciousness and was discovered screaming inside her grave. This brought up new fears. What if Justine was suffocating inside the coffin? She could be dying at that very moment. Elizabeth could no longer bear it. "Stop, please!" she shouted to the driver as soon as they neared a coaching inn outside a rural hamlet. Then she stuttered and blushed like a fool, so he'd believe she needed to relieve herself. The driver immediately understood. "I could use a break. I've a thirst." He pointed to the inn, which was lively with activity despite the hour. "I'll be in there. Anyway, the horses need a rest." She gave him a silver coin. "Take your time." Once he was out of sight, Elizabeth inched open the coffin lid. The stench of piss and shit hit her nose. A fly buzzed past her ear. She held her nose and drew close. Justine's eyes stared ahead, colorless as ever. Elizabeth pressed her ear against Justine's chest. A faint tapping echoed, persistent as the tide. Was Elizabeth imagining this? She recalled how when Caroline passed, she'd appeared alive for some time beyond her last heartbeat. Her bowels gurgled, her lungs creaked. Do not be deceived by the activity, the doctor had warned. This is how the body settles into death. Elizabeth stroked Justine's pale cheek. It was still warm and pliant. By now, rigor mortis should have set in. Justine's nails were torn, covered in blood. Had she been scratching at the wood? What if she'd been alive but died along the way? Elizabeth climbed onto the cart next to the coffin, frantically pressing against Justine's chest. "Breathe! For the love of God, breathe!" Justine let out a cough. Elizabeth felt a wild joy rise, accompanied by a fierce panic. "Wake up, please!" She pinched Justine's cheek, shook her shoulder. She wouldn't rouse. Elizabeth glanced toward the inn. Any moment the coachman could return. She'd lost Caroline. She'd lost William. She couldn't lose Justine, too. "I'll save you," she whispered close to Justine's ear. "For now, you must remain in here. As soon as I can, I'll free you, I promise." Elizabeth looked around the coachyard, pulse racing. Something light caught her eye, something fluttering. A clothesline behind the inn. She stole a pair of breeches and a man's shirt from it. She tucked them inside the coffin beside Justine. She closed the lid, and just in time, the driver ambled from the inn toward the coach. "Ready, mademoiselle?" "Not quite, monsieur. I'm indisposed." She explained she'd spend the night at the inn. "I need rest." She clutched her stomach and groaned so he'd believe she had diarrhea. "That's fine," he yawned. "We'll continue in the morning." "You should go on without me. I've never felt so ill." More stomach clutching and groaning. "Once I recover, I'll hire another carriage." "I don't mind waiting. Your gentleman paid me well." "I've no wish to inconvenience you." She side-eyed the driver. "Leave the coffin. I'll pay someone from the inn to assist me. If you go now, you'll be in Geneva by dawn. I insist." The morning after Justine's hanging, her plain pine coffin was found in a hayfield behind the coaching inn. Inside the coffin was her soiled gown, fashioned of coarse black linen, and a wilted blood-red rose. If one was to judge by the jagged rips in the fabric, the gown had been sliced off Justine's body with a blunt instrument. No one who lived in the hamlet had any idea how the coffin had arrived. The rustic who owned the hayfield insisted on burning the coffin and its contents immediately. Several weeks earlier, his eldest daughter had been pulled into the river by a gigantic man-like creature. He was covered in scars and bore yellow eyes like a wolf and ragged black hair. The monster would have drowned little Gabrielle had not the rustic shot him in the shoulder with a rifle kept for picking off predators. The rustic assured his wife they were safe, that there was no reason to abandon their home. But now, with this coffin appearing from nowhere... The rustic stared into the distance, his keen eyes searching for any sign of who might have left the coffin. He saw no one. "Don't tell my wife," he begged his neighbors, who watched bewildered as he burned the coffin. "It will only upset her." But the flames rising from the rain-soaked wood was so sooty that they drew his wife, though she had been sleeping, for she was heavy with child. "Why the fire?" she asked her husband, choking at the smoke. Her hands instinctively covered her swollen belly. "What are you burning?" "It had been something," he replied, poking the ashes with his hoe. "Now, it is nothing."